Sorry for how slide heavy this video is going to be, but that's just sort of the nature of the topic. It's going to be a reference video, so I probably won't. It probably won't go to people's subscriptions boxes, but I thought I'd best make it anyway. So, as I said a while ago, my Anglo-Saxon conversation video is known among Old English enthusiasts for being full of grammatical mistakes. So more recently, I've mostly talked about phonology, which I am confident about, and anthropological aspects, which I think I'm better equipped to talk about than syntax. But I realise a lot of people who potentially want to learn Old English will be watching this channel, and of course knowing the phonology is not enough to get by if you want to learn the language. And the first time I looked at Old English syntax, I was very daunted by how much stuff you had to think about in order to make a sentence. And a lot of the early mistakes I made resulted from me not thinking about all of the things that I had to. So I thought here I'd just go through a sentence in Old English, just so that people are aware of the kinds of things you have to remember, just so it doesn't seem like an endless void of complicated rules. There is kind of an end in sight. Well, I mean, with any language it's a continuous process, but you can get to a point where you sort of think, I know most of the rules now. If you want to skip straight to the Old English part, I put a time on screen, but I think it's helpful to go through a modern English sentence to understand what goes into constructing that. So take the sentence, the red fox jumped into a grey lake. There are a few parts of speech at work here in this sentence. So we have two nouns, fox and lake, which refer to actual things. We have two adjectives, red and grey, which are descriptive. We have jumped, which is a verb, which refers to an action, the action of jumping. And we have an article, the, and a preposition, into. But this sentence breaks down into larger parts as well. The red fox is what we call a noun phrase. It's the noun, the word fox, and then two other words which add meaning to the word fox. The word red obviously tells us that the fox is red, and the word the is a definite article, so that tells us that the fox is the fox that we're both aware of. If I said a fox, then that would be introducing the new idea of fox into the conversation. But by saying the fox, I'm signalling that this is a known fox, and you know which fox I mean. So all of that is a noun phrase. A grey lake is also a noun phrase. The only difference is that because we're introducing the idea of the lake to the conversation, it takes the indefinite article or a. This is not a known lake, and I don't expect you to know which lake I mean, so it's indefinite. So both of these noun phrases refer to a real thing in the world, or two separate real things in the world. And then the verb and the preposition, jumped into, tell us about the relationship between those two real things, the relationship between the fox and the lake. So, to focus on the word jumped, this tells us that the action was jumping, but this ed inflection at the end tells us this happened in the past, and it's no longer happening. The word into tells us sort of how the fox jumping is related to the lake, and in this case it implies the fox started off outside the lake and ended up in the lake. So that's the function of all these words within the sentence. How do we know that it was the fox doing the jumping and not the lake? Well, apart from the fact that lakes don't jump, the fox is the subject of this sentence, so it's the thing doing the verb, whereas the lake is the object of the sentence, it's having the verb done to it, it's being jumped into. And in modern English we signal this by putting the subject at the start of a sentence and the object at the end, or not necessarily the start and end, but we put the subject earlier than the object in most cases. So that's why the sentence is structured in this way. To translate this sentence into Old English, we bear all that information in mind, but we just use it in a different way. So let's take the noun phrase, the red fox. The first question to ask is this the subject of the sentence, is it the object, or is it something else? And in this case, the fox is doing the jumping, so it's the subject of the sentence, and that means it takes the nominative case. Then we have another factor which doesn't apply in modern English. Which grammatical gender does the word fox fall into? Masculine, feminine, or neuter? Well, we don't have grammatical gender anymore in modern English, and for most words in Old English, the gender isn't obvious from the way the word looks. You just have to kind of learn it and know it for each word. In this case, the word fox takes the masculine gender, fox, or fox, depending on how you interpret the letter X. Some people say x, some people say x. That doesn't mean it's considered especially manly or anything like that. It's just a category the word falls into. And within the masculine gender, there are several declensions, which are kind of subcategories that affect how the word inflects. And fox is a strong A stem noun. And then finally, there's only one fox, so this is in the singular. Just like in modern English, this is a specific known fox, so it takes the definite article. But there are lots of potential forms of the definite article that depend on case and gender and the number of things that you're dealing with, so whether it's singular or plural. In this case, we inflect for the nominative singular, and fox is masculine, so we use the form se, which is the nominative singular masculine version of the definite article the. Se fox. The word for red is rad, but again, that's just the stem. We have to add an ending to agree with the nominative singular masculine noun fox. But because red is a descriptive word, an adjective, there's another factor here as well. Old English adjectives can be either strong or weak. When I was first studying Old English, I wrongly assumed that a strong adjective went with a strong noun and a weak adjective went with a weak noun, but that's not true. In fact, a weak adjective is used to describe a definite noun, so a known specific noun like the fox, that fox, John's fox, your fox. These are all definite foxes, so we have the definite article. And in this case we have the definite article se, so in this case the noun is definite, so the adjective raud should be weak. So we're looking for the weak nominative masculine singular form of raud, which is rauda. The word fox also has to be declined nominative and masculine, but in this case that is just fox, so nothing changes in this specific situation. So our noun phrase is se rauda fox. The other noun phrase is a bit different, a grey lake. In this case we're talking about the object of the sentence. This lake is being jumped into. It's having the action done to it, so it takes the accusative case, and there are a couple of complications there which I'll explain in a bit. This isn't the lake, it's a lake. I don't expect you to know which lake I'm talking about. I'm introducing the idea of the lake, so this one is indefinite. It's only one lake, so it's singular. And finally, the word lake is mere in Old English, and that's a masculine I-stem noun. Old English didn't actually have an indefinite article. There's no word for as in a grey lake. You just say the equivalent of grey lake. The word lake, mere, takes the accusative singular form, which is just mere in this case. The word grey is grai, and not only does it have to be declined accusative singular and masculine, it also takes the strong form in this case because the noun is indefinite. It's a lake, so that makes it graine. So our noun phrases are se rauda fox and graine mere. So now we need a verb. I think there are probably a couple of words for jumping, but we'll use hlaupon, which gives us the modern word leap. For a verb, we have to conjugate it, and that works slightly differently to what we do with noun phrases. There are a few different conjugations that verbs fall into, and this one, hlaupon, is a strong class 7 verb. So we're talking about the fox jumping, and that makes it third person. I'm not talking about me, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about something outside of this conversation. I'm talking about it, the fox. In fact, in Old English, I'm talking about him because the fox is masculine and takes masculine pronouns. And this happened in the past, and it's no longer happening, so we want the past simple tense. And I'm telling you a fact about the world. I'm not presenting a hypothetical, I'm not ordering you to do something, so in this case we use the indicative mood, which I think is probably the most common mood. So we want the indicative third person past simple form of hlaupon, which is hlaup, so that's our verb. And we also need a preposition equivalent to into. And I'm not all that good with Old English prepositions, so I was helped here by Aldwin, who's the owner of the fantastic Old English Discord, which I've linked in the description. It's a very good resource. And in this case, in Old English, Aldwin advised me that you'd probably use on. So on probably wouldn't work in this position in modern English, but it has a slightly different distribution in Old English. It was used in a slightly different way. So it could be used to mean into, it could be used to mean in, as well as on in the modern sense. And that comes across in text, so there are loads of instances where it uses the word on, where it wouldn't work nowadays. So a person could be on a house, or they could be speaking on Latin, and so on. So on works here, on. Which preposition you use can affect which case the object takes. So usually it will either take the direct object, which is accusative, or the indirect object, which is dative. And you can usually work out which case the object should take based on which preposition you're using. But there are some prepositions that can give different cases depending on the situation, and on is one of those dual case prepositions. As a rule of thumb, these prepositions will give the dative case if the subject is stationary, if it's standing still, but they'll give the accusative case if there's motion involved or motion implied. So in this case, you can sort of judge this by asking yourself, if this was a modern sentence, could I use into, or would I have to use in? And in this situation, there is motion, the fox is starting outside the lake and it ends up inside the lake, it's into, so you would use the accusative. And thanks again to Aldwin for clarifying that for me. And that's why we put this noun phrase in the accusative rather than the dative, and I'll play with a few alternatives later to make that clearer. So we have these loose bits of the sentence. Se rauda fox hlaup on græne mere. The last question to ask ourselves is what order we then put these in. In modern English, word order is very rigid because in most cases it's the only thing that signals what's the subject and what is the object. But Old English tells us this using word endings, so you'll often hear that you can put these parts of a sentence in any order you want. And it's probably true that an Old English speaker would understand them in any order, provided you didn't break the noun phrases apart. But there are still patterns to word order in Old English, it's not completely random. So for one thing, a simple standalone sentence or an independent clause is likely to have verb's second word order. So the verb is the second element of the sentence a lot of the time. And that's bearing in mind that noun phrases are only counted as one element each. So this sentence would be Se rauda fox hlaup on græne mere, as it would be in modern English. But if you added something to the start of the sentence, you might find the verb the verb's second word order still applied. So if you changed it to then the red fox jumped into the grey lake, that might push the subject to the side, and then it's Þá hlaup se rauda fox on græne mere. Word order isn't my strong suit either, so if anyone has anything to add or correct, then I'll credit you in the description and include the correction, but I think that's alright, I think that's a decent enough summary. If we switched certain elements of this sentence out for other things, then we'd have to change the words accordingly. So if we replace the fox with a duck, duke, that word is feminine, so we have to change the rest of the noun phrase accordingly. Seu raude duke. If you wanted to say it was currently jumping, present tense, then you'd change the verb to the present tense. Seu raude duke hlaups on græne mere. You could say that it was jumping into grey lakes, plural, and then you'd have to modify that noun phrase to be plural. Græja meros. Or rather than saying the duck was jumping into a grey lake, you could say it was in a grey lake. Seu raude duke is on græjum mere. So this time the verb has changed to is. So if you remember what I said earlier about dual case prepositions, the duck is no longer moving into the lake, it's now static in the lake. So, the sentence doesn't imply movement anymore. So this now takes the dative, so grey gets declined in the dative, græjum. If we wanted to make it into a specific lake and make it definite, then we could add the definite article. So that would have to be the dative singular definite article, tham. But because the noun phrase is now definite, we'd also have to swap the adjective for its weak form, græjon. So now we have Seu raude duke is on tham græjon mere. The red duck is in the grey lake. What if we wanted to put this sentence in a completely different context? What if we wanted to say, for example, he asks that the red duck be in the grey lake? He asketh that the red duck be in the grey lake. Well, now our sentence becomes a dependent clause within a wider sentence. So that often causes the word order to shuffle around so that the verb is at the end of a sentence. But as well as being a dependent clause, this sentence is no longer expressing a fact about the world. Or this clause, anyway, is no longer expressing a fact about the world. It's now expressing something that's not true, at least not at the time the speaker says it. The duck isn't in the lake, but he asks that it be in the lake. This means it shouldn't take the indicative mood, it should take the subjunctive. This only affects the verb is, which I think should become siu in this case. He asketh that seu raude duke on tham græjon mere siu. A final thing which I can't think of a way of shoving into this sentence is that there are some verbs that give the genitive or dative, so the thing having the verb done to it takes the genitive or the dative rather than the accusative. So an example of this is the word help on, to help. If you wanted to say the equivalent of you're helping me, you could say Þú hjálpst mín, literally you help my. And it's not constructed that way because there's some invisible implied word there. It's not like the sentence is really you help me, you help my cause, or you help my health or anything like that. It's literally just you help my, where in modern English we would say you help me. That's just how it's constructed in Old English. So to sum all that up, I put a list of questions you should ask yourself when constructing an Old English sentence on screen. Obviously that's not exhaustive, but it's a good way to sort of start forming relatively simple sentences. And do check the description for any mistakes that I might have pointed out to me. which I'll put in the description and credit you, but I think that should all be okay. Thank you very much indeed, and I will, well, this isn't really a weekly video, but I'll talk to you at some point in the future.